Hi, my name is John Wellington. I'm an artist and teacher, and today I'm going to be showing you my limited portrait set. These are the colors that will always get me in the ballpark of almost every type of flesh tone there is, as long as you're not wearing makeup. So if you're new to oil painting, this is a very good set to start with for painting flesh, because after you see my demo, you'll see how many different flesh tones you can get just out of this. So what I have here is I have a titanium white, I have ivory black, I have burnt sienna, raw sienna, and Vidian. One of the other things about this set is for those of you who are interested not only in direct painting, meaning just putting paint on and painting, but in building up for indirect painting, which is grisaille or verdaccio, which is another form of grisaille, that three of the colors in the set are perfect for underpainting, and they're three colors I mostly use for underpainting, and that is black, the brown, the burnt sienna, and the Vidian, mixed with white. So I'll get into that later. So the set really serves two purposes: for those who want to get flesh color right away, and it serves for the other purpose of for those who really want to work in an old master way of building up an underpainting. So when you squeeze your colors out of the tube, you'll notice that you're seeing them at full strength, 100%. So this gives you a great sense of the paint, but if you're not using your paint at 100%, it's not telling the true story. So I recommend, when you don't know a paint, I recommend taking some white and putting it out in front of each color and taking that color and mixing it down. So with black, and here we can see you're going, well, this is gray. And you're right, it is gray, but let's say I had three different blacks out here. Let's say I had lamp black, ivory black, and Mars black. They're all going to make grays, but one gray is going to be warmer, one gray is going to be cooler, one might pull towards the blue or towards the red. And so by mixing it down with white, you start to see what the true nature of that is. And that's one mixture, and while I have this here, I'll even do a lighter mixture. So even within one color, and this goes even with, if you have different sets, I'm personally hoping you'll start using, Tusc and pine, because they're such great paints, but you might have some oil paints by other companies. And one of the ways to see which colors you like is to make comparisons. So if you have a raw sienna, let's say from Winsor & Newton, take it down with white. And I have thoughts about that I will not say on the video. But I will say that it's not a raw sienna. Well, I guess I will say it on the video. It's not a raw sienna I like to use. But the Tuscan pine raw sienna for me is gorgeous. So by taking the same color down by different brands, you will actually see different colors. So this is just a great practice, and I really recommend it. There is pads that you can buy. One that had by JerrysArtarama, where you can actually then take these takedowns and put notations on the pad so you can keep a record of your colors. And watercolors always do this, but I think it's very important that oil painters do this, and I do this as well with the pad I bought from JerrysArtarama. So here I'm taking down the burnt sienna. Remember, burnt dirt from around the town of Siena. And if you notice, it's a brown, but it's a red brown. And that's why it's in the set. If you notice, I don't have burnt umber in the set. I don't have raw umber in the set. Raw umber taken down with white is a little bit greener. Burnt umber is a little yellower. So the burnt sienna reads red. This is raw sienna. I don't have yellow ochre on this palette. There's a reason. I love yellow ochre. It's a great color, but yellow ochre always feels yellow to me. Raw sienna feels yellow, but yellow in terms of flesh, that it feels more like flesh yellow than yellow yellow. And this is a personal choice, although it's also an old master choice. So here I'm going to take that down. So the idea of these 5 colors, and I am including black and white as colors, and maybe in science there's the absence of color and this, but I'm thinking about paint tubes. So I'm not thinking about optical science. I'm thinking about pigments that have been ground up and tubed. And so when I'm talking about black as a color, it's because if I compare it again to other blacks, it's going to have its own color properties. It's warm or cooler and pulling to different colors. Last one is Vidian. Vidian is, I included Vidian for a number of reasons. One, it's just a color that I'm always using to bring cools into flesh. And the other reason is that it's a fantastic underpainting color. So traditionally, in Russian icon paintings or Greek Orthodox, all the Orthodox icon paintings, they use terra verte, which is an earth green, for their paintings. Later on, some Italian artists used it, and the term for it was verdaccio, vert, green. Verdaccio, Italian word. I've upped it to Vidian because I like a little bit more bite. I find that the earth greens, although beautiful, are just not my taste. They're a little too subtle. And so I like the Vidian because, like these other colors, they plays very well, meaning that when I say a color plays very well, what I mean is it can hide its nature and blend with other colors. It's like a child that can play well in the sandbox. Doesn't need to be the star. But at the same time, it does hold its own. Matter of fact, all these colors hold their own. So now you're seeing the 3 colors. So what I have them here on the palette, but the palette is gray, and I'm seeing the colors on a gray palette, which is great. But when you're painting, you're not always painting on the exact same color as your palette. You're painting a sky, you're in this case flesh, against a green background, against a red wall, whatever it is that you're painting. And so relationship of colors is essential to understand. I'm not a master of relationship of colors, and I don't think you have to be. I think what you have to do is you have to understand conceptually that color changes next to what it is against. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this gray. So I'll do this with a brush. I think I'll take less paint. And I'm going to put this gray up to this gray. And I'll put this gray, same gray, right here. And I'm going to do it right here. And right here. So I'm working on 3 canvases. They're all linen. This one, they're all acrylic primed. This one is called the Senso, and it's a transparent acrylic primer that allows you to see the weave of the canvas, which is really quite beautiful. And then these 2 were the white priming, acrylic prime, and this one has an acrylic gesso on top of the acrylic primer. This is just a side note. If you have an oil primed canvas, you must not use acrylic gesso on top of an oil primed canvas. Use acrylic only on acrylic. So just keep that in mind. if ever that comes up. Okay, let me now go to my next color. This is the burnt sienna with white. And what you're seeing here is what I'm hoping you're seeing, is you're seeing that the color will be looking a little bit different. And I've mentioned this before, but this is the Joseph Albers theories that no color looks the same if it's placed against different environments. And matter of fact, I'm looking right now, and this looks much brighter and much redder, and this looks darker. This one looks lighter. This one, I'm thinking of the burnt sienna. This one looks darker and a little bit duller. And same thing with looking at the grays. This one looks brighter. This one looks duller. Actually, here against these two, this looks very dark, and that looks very light, and yet it's the same color. So if I have a student, which sometimes I'll do, I'll mix the same color, I'll put on two things, I'll say, mix me these colors, and you know it's misleading. But of course, they're going to be mixing two different colors where I didn't mix two different colors. So next I'm going to do the raw sienna with white. So this limited palette, this limited flesh palette is not something I came up with. This is not an original. The first time it was ever told to me, I was working at a poster and frame shop. I had just graduated my art school, the Rhode Island School of Design. I was 22 years old, and I ran the shop by myself, so I was visited all the time by different people. And this one man who delivered the New York Times to different people in this atrium that I worked in Manhattan, his name was Jules, and he was doing this as a job. He was past retirement age, but so he used to come and sit down with me in my shop and talk with me. And at the time I had to paint flesh, I had a number of colors. In order for me to paint flesh, I had cadmium red, I had different cadmium reds, cadmium orange, vermilion, cadmium yellow, Naples yellow, different greens, different cobalt blues, magnesium blues. I have all of these on the palette in order to paint flesh. And I could paint flesh, but I was mixing so many ingredients. It's like trying to make a soup for somebody, and you add this ingredient, you add that ingredient, you add all these ingredients, and when someone says, "Oh, I love that soup, can you make it again?" You're like, "I don't remember what I did." And so when I would paint, let's say, an eye and a cheek, and it looked really, it's like, wow, this looks pretty good. The next day, when I had to try and make those colors again, I was lost. And so Jules, he said, John, if burnt sienna and raw sienna can paint, you can use that to make most flesh. And what I said to Jules was, no, that sounds too easy. And I ignored his advice for years. You would think I would have gone right home and been smart and just painted better right away, but I didn't. It just seemed I almost didn't want to take the easy way out. And then years later, reading about the palettes of Velázquez, of Rembrandt, of all these painters who didn't have an art store in their studio or didn't even have an art store across the street and were using limited palette paints because paint cost money, was hard to get. And so lapis lazuli and vermilions, there's certain cinnabars. These were colors that you use for very special parts of your painting, but most of it was done with less. And when I started, then it came back, and I went, oh, Jules was so right, that this is what most of these artists did. They didn't have cadmium oranges. They weren't playing around with cadmium reds and magnesium blues in the flesh tones, and so I wish I could tell him, and I don't think he's with us anymore, but because this is 42 years ago. But Jules, you're right. that these colors that the old masters used really get you in the ballpark. So do they paint every flesh tone exactly? No, they don't. They get you very close under natural light or under, sustained light. If you're lighting someone with red light, bright red light with a filter, or a bright green light, is it going to get that light? Get that? No. So what I think of these colors as is, I think of them in the kitchen as salt and pepper. These are the basics: salt, pepper, garlic. This is what you start with, and then you add more as you need. So when I mentioned about makeup, if someone is wearing bright red lipstick, this is not going to do it. But when you paint using this, and then when it comes time for the bright red lipstick, for the purple eyeliner, then you add that. Just like in cooking, you add more spices as you need it. You put heat to the food. So this is a simple cooking. This is your chicken, where you're just going to roast it with salt and pepper and a little garlic. But if you want to have a curry, you add that later. And that's the same thing with painting. So, and the reason why I stress this so much when I'm teaching is because I think that with the great freedom we have of having all these colors, go to an art supply store and you see everything, you go, oh my God, I have this, and I have this. And you go and you do impulse buying and you buy them and you bring them home, and then they sit in your drawer because you've tried to use them, and you get intimidated because you're mixing these very expensive, beautiful colors, and you're making mud with them, and you're not using them to their best ability. And it's like cooking with saffron, but then putting so much salt in it, or something that you don't get the saffron flavor, or you use like Tabasco sauce, although I love Tabasco sauce, and you kill the saffron. So you want to start limited, and then you want to add on, so that you can paint someone with bright red lipstick, or someone with green hair, or whatever, or even not even paint naturally. Just, paint someone with bright cadmium yellow skin. So again, this is just an older way of seeing. It's a less expensive way of seeing. It's cost effective. And for anybody who wants to paint naturally, it gets you really in the ballpark quickly. So now that I have these three colors, I'll put the green down too. And the green, again, it's a Vidian. Wow, look at that. I will say, for any of you that have not have tried Tuscan pine yet, you're in for a surprise. If you've never painted before, and Tuscan pine is your first paint, you are so lucky. And if you have painted a lot and used very high quality paints, you're going to be thrilled. There are certain brands that are even very expensive brands that I cannot do this demo with, because the raw sienna grays out with white. Their burnt sienna doesn't have enough redness. It's sort of dull. And the only way you can really use a limited palette is if the limited colors are gorgeous. And thankfully, Tuscan pine are gorgeous colors. Spectacular. My application of paint on all of these is opaque-ish, trying to be opaque. And now let's just take a look. I'm hoping this will come across. We never know. I don't know what's coming across on a video screen or not. But what I'm hoping you're seeing is that these two colors do not look the same. These two colors do not look the same. These two colors don't look the same. That even though they're the same color, maybe to your eyes, this row looks darker, this row looks brighter, this row looks brighter, this row looks a little darker with the exception of this color and this color. These two look lighter, and these two look lighter. So here it's almost like a backwards S or a train track crossing, and this one is more consistent. The main thing is you don't have to remember that the colors change depending on what you're painting them with and how they change. The main concept is just know that they change and be aware of it. And if you're aware of it, you can start to manipulate. Another thing is it also means that whatever color you think you're mixing on the palette down here might look different up here. And that's a very important consideration to make, because a lot of times you think you're going to mix a perfect color here. It's under different lighting, it's under maybe a different surface, and then when you put it here, it's just going to have a different color temperature, and it's going to have a different value. So as long as you understand that colors change, you can play with it and manipulate it. So now, just to bring this color change to completion, I am going to do the paints out of the box, just to see. And again, when I said the most important thing is to understand the concept, to understand the question, not the answer. So I don't know the answer as I'm doing this. I don't know if you said, well, John, what are the color changes going to be between the three of these? I mean, I could guess, but I don't know. I'm doing this to find out. So I'm with you as I'm doing this. This is my experiment as well as a demo for you. So that's the black. The reason why I do my demos like this, you'll see me sometimes do a painting, but I have all these color swatches, is because I understand the mentality of Chelsea galleries. And I know that if I just do a portrait, they won't find it interesting, but if I put some color swatches around there, I'm probably going to get a show. So, just wanted you to know my thoughts behind all these little side notations. It's all about gallery representation. All right. The black, I'm not really seeing much of a change, or if there is, a little bit here. Yeah, I'm seeing it here. That definitely looks darker, that looks lighter. Sometimes you can't see a change, or maybe you can see it and I can't see it. Let's try the brown, which is my burnt sienna. So in this limited palette, I think of the brown as my red. And I'm trying to juxtapose these two colors, put them adjacent to each other, to really see the difference. Here we can see a difference. That looks much redder than that for some reason. That feels pulling towards the blue. That feels like it's pulling towards the yellow to me. And if you perceive it differently, you're wrong. No, I'm kidding. If you perceive it differently, you perceive it differently. Try not to get black in this brown. And after I do this with the colors at their full strength, I'm going to start mixing the colors, because I want to start giving you an idea of the flesh tones without yet painting flesh, but just all the differences. Because remember, there is no flesh I mean, you say flesh tones, what does that even mean? One, none of us have the exact same flesh tones. We don't have the exact same flesh tones in different parts of our body, right? Our fingers, the extremities are more reddish. We have areas that, in me, my 5 o'clock shadow makes me greenish, where the Vidian comes in handy. You know, you have every ethnicity, every mix of ethnicity, every lighting situation changes. So when someone talks about flesh, like the crayon company used to have a flesh color, and it always, even when I was young, that just seemed absurd to me, because it was a grayed out, it didn't even look like Caucasian flesh. It just looked like some grayed out color I never wanted to use as a kid. And then I would have, every now and then, I would have a student bring in, like a Winsor Newton had a flesh color. And they would bring it in and go, oh, can I use this in the painting? And what I would do, I don't think it was too toxic. I probably couldn't get away with doing it now. I'm talking about like 20 years ago, is I would get all the students there and I'd have them all stick out their arm or their hand, and I would put a dab of that flesh color on everybody's, the flesh in quotation, color in everybody's flesh. And you know what? Didn't look like anybody's flesh. You know, so even and that flesh, by the way, was supposed to be a Caucasian flesh. It just didn't match. So this idea of what a flesh color is it's a movable feast, to quote the title of a book. And so the best way to find the flesh color is to observe someone's flesh, someone's flesh here, that my arm and my face and different parts of my face and my arm, the underside of my arm and this side of my arm are not the same flesh color, that it's constantly changing. So be very open-minded about your ideas of painting flesh, even on the same person, let alone people of different ethnicities, or someone who's suntanned, or someone who has been indoors. And so what all of this is about is options. It's not about painting one type of flesh or one type of flesh in a certain condition. It is about the myriad of values and colors that we see when we look at humans. All right, so now last is Vidian. If you notice, the Vidian is a little bit harder for me to get an opacity with. And the reason for this is this color, although not a transparent color, is more transparent than, let's say, the other three colors. It's not a transparent color, but it's not exactly an opaque color. It's more like a semi-opaque color. And one of the things you'll notice with paints, especially very good paints, very good quality paints, will make sure that the paints don't all feel the same. They don't have a homogeneous Wonder Bread feel. You will feel a difference in the different pigments will behave differently, and they should. When you have paints that everything feels the same, it's usually student grade, and that is done because they have less pigment and more filler, because pigment is expensive. So the great paints have all pigment, or mostly pigment, and if they ever use filler, it's only for reasons of stability, not for reasons of saving money. And stability, when I say stability, it means keeping the oil and the pigment bound together. It's not really so important for this, but you know, any little piece of information is something you can use to impress your friends. All right, now let's take a look. That looks lighter, that looks darker, that looks brighter. Everything on this side looks darker, and everything on this side looks brighter. Here it's a little bit of a mixed bag because we're dealing with a cool imprimatura. Again, imprimatura is a fancy Italian word for colored ground, toned ground. And here, well, that looks brighter, brighter, brighter. Here I can't tell. This looks brighter, that looks brighter. I think that looks brighter, that looks brighter. A little bit more mixed here. Here, no confusion for me. So now I have all these colors mixed with white consistently, and mixed with not mixed with any colors. These bottom four are right out of the tube. I didn't do white. Why not? Let's finish it up. Let's try not to get the green in it. It's a beautiful white. So titanium white, this white is a very bright white. It's a fantastic white. It's a high covering white. It's also an inexpensive white. When you get to lead whites, there are advantages to lead whites in terms of drying time, but they're very toxic. And I did not want to have I didn't want to have someone not buy this set because of a toxic pigment, which I think is very reasonable to not want lead around, especially if you have children, you have pets. Again, it's not airborne, and I think it's safe to paint with lead if you follow certain rules, like wear gloves, wash your hands, and don't let children around your paint. But with titanium white, I don't have to worry about that. And also lead white is a very expensive pigment. And so I really wanted a set that can get people right from stage one to just buy some paint and be able to start playing and then add to it. You go, oh, I need a brighter red, get a cadmium red light or a cadmium red medium. Oh, I need a blue, get an ultramarine. Ultramarine is a very good, it's one of my favorite blues, but it's also a very good entry blue. So you get this and then you keep adding. It's exactly like, to me, painting and the buying and adding of paint materials is exactly like cooking. And when I'm cooking and buying spices, and it's the same. And then you find there are certain colors you use more than others. So when the cadmium reds, which no matter what good paint company, the cadmiums are always going to be higher priced. I find I'm not using I use it, but I use it to great effect. I don't use cadmium red and try and make a brown out of it. I use cadmium red when I want that punch. And so you learn how to really optimize each color. All right, so now that I have this, oh yeah, and by the way, white on white, this is a very good lesson. What happens with white on white? Well, you can barely see it. So that looks darker than that. These two, that looks duller. That looks a little brighter to me. But this is why some people work on imprimaturs, by the way, and don't work on white canvases. You can work on white canvases. Great paintings have been done on white canvases. Two painters right off the bat who worked on white-ish canvases, Lucian Freud and Van Gogh, worked on whitish with Van Gogh, off-white usually, but you can see the canvas coming through. Sometimes this would, if I was going to do a Van Gogh demo, I might even do it on something like this. This might even be almost more true. But the reason why people work with imprimatur, with a ground, is because this way you can work your lights and your darks at the same time. If you're working on a white canvas, you're working your darks only. So it's really one-directional. Now, great paintings can be done like this, but if you're ever wondering, well, why do I need an imprimatur? This is why. The white does not show up on it. Okay, now I'm going to play. I have my brown, but what if I want a darker brown? Like I don't have a burnt, I don't have a burnt, no, I have a burnt cyan, excuse me. I don't have a raw umber or burnt umber or like a red umber, a dark brown. So I'm mixing black and I'm mixing the burnt sienna, and then all of a sudden I get a darker brown. So I just saved myself one tube of paint if I want. Now, if you were to ask me, does that mean you don't have burnt umber and raw umber and red umber and Van Dyke brown and all these other colors? I'd say, no, of course I have all those colors. I get as many colors as I can get. And I love using different colors. But if you're working limited, you're not married to, oh, all my browns have to look like this. See, all of a sudden, if I was to tell you that this was a red umber, you would say, oh yeah, that looks like a red umber or a burnt umber. You wouldn't think necessarily that this is raw sienna and black. And if I take this down with white, just going to make some mixes. Well, actually, I mixed yellow in there. Let me try and clear this up. Black and white neutralize. Now I'll add some yellow to it, which I had here. And what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you, I'm just going to make tones. I'm making flesh tones. Here I'm making flesh tones in the browns. And notice how much yellower this looks against here than here. That's interesting. See, these are all surprises for me. I never know how the color is going to look until I do it. But that's much yellower than that, and it's the same. It's from the same thing. Here I'm going to mix the burnt sienna and the raw sienna together. If you think of this as a red and this is a yellow, then this is orangish. Or as I call it, my idea of my perfect tan. Let's continue. Add white. Add more yellow. See, this looks so much brighter than that, same color. Just never know how it's going to hit. This looks duller. So that looks dull, that looks bright, because this is a warm against a bluish tint, a bluish gray. This is a warm against warm. And this feels cool. So that, again, this color, 3 different ones. Wow, boy, they look different. I like this one the best. Neutralize it. So neutralizing with using black and gray is a very 19th and 18th century idea, where they used to make color lines and they used to make a gray line. Not everybody. I'm talking about Western European academic art. And they would take a flesh tone, and when it was turning into a shadow or a halftone, or it was over a bone, or a certain part of the face, they would mix it with gray. And what it does is it neutralizes or pulls towards the blue. So and when I'm talking about artists that did this, I mean, I'm talking, Eng, I'm talking David, Courbet, who else? They all did, but I'm trying to give you good examples. Velasquez, by the way, if you're interested, who got me interested, other than Jules, when I worked at the poster and frame shop, the other person that got me interested in this type of painting was studying Velázquez, if you're from Spain. So here we see this is brighter, this is darker, same color. And we see here, I'll unneutralize it a bit. And as you're seeing in the palette, this is really something that people don't often teach. If you notice, I'm not mixing like this. I'm mixing in circles, and I'm rotating my brush. Do you see? So as I'm mixing, and this gives a much cleaner mix than going like that. And also, this type of mixing will contaminate the brush as I hit that. By doing this, I contain my mixture. So it's something to practice. Right now we're getting into what I call the British range of flesh tones. Northern British. Not getting out in the sun, but drinking great whiskeys. Let's play more. Here I will do the red and the gray, but lighter. And what I'm hoping you'll see is that, oops, that looks exactly like that. What I'm hoping you'll see from this is this great range. And I haven't touched the green. So I can keep going on like this and keep the infinite mixtures. Actually, I'll do one more. This is a throwback to another video where a color that I helped in coming up with, which is a Wellington Vert Noir, which is based on an Old Master green, which was the use of a black, usually it was an ivory black, and a yellow to make green. And so in this case, I did use a much brighter yellow. In my mind, we didn't use lead tin yellow. It's not lead based, but in my mind, I was thinking of a bright Old Master yellow, which lead tin yellow is one of those yellows. And in this case, the green I'm going to make is the raw sienna and the black. And this is going to be a duller green. Where you see this color used all the time is in Rembrandts. And here, this was just raw sienna and black. And when I say black, of course, ivory black. Will this work with lamp black or Mars black? Yes. Will it make a different color? Yes. Actually, I got to remake this because I didn't make enough. So I'm doing brush mixtures. Here you can see that swirling way that I mix. So my palette is many swirls of color and my brush going back and forth. So this will not be the same color here. Let me do it this way. There we go. Oh, it's pretty close. Wow, look how dark that looks there. And now I'll mix it with white. Now I'll mix it with more white. And maybe a little burnt sienna. And then I'm going to call this part of the lesson a day. And just because you start to see how varied with just white, ivory black, burnt sienna, and raw sienna, how absolutely varied my colors are. And I could keep doing this all day long. But I want to eat lunch. So I'm going to stop and get to the next part of the lesson. So one of the colors I didn't use earlier in doing all the flesh tones was the Vidian. And it's not that I couldn't have used it, I just really wanted to let you know how with titanium white, ivory black, burnt sienna, and raw sienna, I can make so many different tones that fit within flesh without going outside those tones. Why I have included Vidian in the set is because it is probably my personal favorite underpainting color. And there are also two other colors on the set that are traditional and great underpainting colors. And one is black, because black and white makes a grisaille, and brown and white. And this brown, or the burnt sienna, are more reddish brown. If you want it to be a little bit darker brown, you would add a little bit of black, so it would have a burnt umber feel as opposed to a burnt sienna. It's a very easy adjust. And the Vidian, when I'm using it, I sometimes add a little bit of black as well, or not. It depends on how I'm feeling. So this set serves, it's kind of actually like two sets. One set, limited flesh palette, getting there really in the ballpark. And the other is, if you're like me and you love indirect painting, and for any of you who have looked me up and have seen my work, you'll see that that's the thing I teach. It's a great set for underpainting. So I'm going to start with just showing you, I'm going to make up a face. Wish me luck. And I'm going to start with the Vidian. I'm going to add a little bit of black just to start. I'm using an alkyd-based medium, which is relatively fast drying, not hopefully too thick. That helps my paint flow. I tend not to like using mineral spirits as a medium because mineral spirits, in fact, is not a medium. Mineral spirits are a solvent, and what they do is they break down the binder, and I don't want to break down the binder. What I want to do is extend the binder. In this case, the binder is linseed oil, so you could use linseed oil, but linseed oil is it's not slow drying, but it's slower drying than this. So let me start here. And if you notice, I'm also starting with a very light touch. Whoops. Not a light touch. But for those of you who have studied with me or watched a video or two, you always remember what I say. It's just paint. Gone. So I'm just getting something here. I don't know who I'm painting. It'll come. I always say that these are people from another time, another epoch. So I'm filming out of Raleigh. I don't know what Mr. Raleigh looked like, but I'm taking a guess. If this ends up looking like one of you, that was completely unintentional, and that's my disclaimer. So I'm just working with Vidian. Big collar. This is the way I would start many paintings. I'm starting with my darks. As a rule, I'm trying to start lighter. Yes, I have, just because I'm working fast, there's some globs. But I'm working basically one color. I mean, there's a little black mixed in. But what I want to do is sort of work again like I'm drawing. Like when I'm drawing with pencil or with charcoal, light sketch, and then I can start to set up my lights and darks. Let's see. I'll set up shadow. I'll have the light coming from here. And I'm doing a sort of a scrubby. I'm doing a scrub because it's fast. If I was taking my time, I might do a stroke that's called a bâche, which means it's French word for wash, where it would be like this. It'd be more like a I'm going to go a little bit darker for the hair. Give it dark hair. I am doing an underpainting of a Caucasian gentleman. And I'm going to paint them all in green. This would be my green underpainting. And that's the thing, when you're worried about color, it doesn't really matter what color you use ultimately. You know, it does if you're trying to do naturalist flesh, but you know, if you're Vincent van Gogh, if you're part of the someone like Vladimir or Andre Derain, part of the Fauvism movement, you might be using super bright colors that have nothing to do with reality. And you'll see that Picasso in his blue period, right? The flesh was blue. So in my doing a green underpainting, if I just thought I wanted to have this as a finished painting and never go over it with color, that would be fine. It's really something to think about, that, you know, when you're working in a pencil drawing, you're not working in flesh tones if you're using graphite, right, or charcoal. You're doing everything in black and white, and that is not any flesh I know. And yet it works for us. So whether you work naturalistically or any other way, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now that was a touch of black and the Vidian. Now I'm going to take the Vidian and some white. And I'm just going to thin it down a bit. And you see again that circular motion. And what you're seeing I'm doing right here is kind of making a scale. I add to this. And just by doing this, I've just made a gray scale, a value scale with Vidian, starting relatively light, because again, this is light. There's a rule in painting, which I've mentioned many times, and I will continue to, which is transparence in the shadows, opaques in the lights. I adjust this rule. Again, it's just a rule, but I adjust this rule to be feels transparent, or pulls towards the transparent in the shadows and pulls to the impasto in the lights. But again, if you want to be opaque in the shadows, that's fine. It's just an older way of painting. The shadows are often thinned out. So here, I'm going to start working my greens, and you can feel there's something else. There's always something else, isn't there? One more thing. That when you add white to any color, and on another video when I'll talk about underpaintings and glazing and differences between glazing and semi-opaque applications of paint, but anytime you add color, white to a color, it's going to cool the color. So if you notice, this Vidian out of the tube feels warmer than this. As soon as I add white to it, not only is it making it lighter, but it's also making it cooler, which now is great, because one of the things that I like to think about is color temperature when I'm painting, and this is a way of playing with color temperature. So I'm not sure how many of you have ever experienced where you're working on flesh and you say this exact word. Say, the flesh looks dead. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One can be you're not pushing your values. But the other can be if you're working in colors. Let's say you're painting a very pinkish Caucasian guy, someone who has a very ruddy nose, and you keep thinking, I see so many reds in his face, and you keep pushing those reds. At some point, you don't have any cools to play against, and it just sort of dies. And if you just added a little blues in the paint or a little bit of greens, it would come back to life, or even a little bit of grays. So this idea of pushing your color temperatures is something that can really create depth in oil paint. So if you're painting a landscape outside, working your blues and greens on top of a warmish tone. Right now I'm also using a drawing brush because I want to fine tune. If you're working if you're working outside, you're working with so many cool colors that it's sometimes really wonderful to have a warm undertone canvas. Like this would be beautiful for en plein air, for example. I like to often, if I'm painting a light-skinned person, I often like to do a greenish underpainting. If I'm painting a person whose skin is darker, I sometimes like to do a brownish underpainting and then see the cools on top of the browns. There's no right way or wrong way, and I mix it up. I don't even follow one rule. But I'm always thinking about different color temperatures. I'm thinking about the green on top of this warmish tone. Get the eyes. There's a rule in composition that I came up with called rule of the stare. Staring. Grab somebody's attention. So I think I'm going to have him stare. I'm mixing black, green, taking off some of the medium. There we go. Have his eye there. And Again, I have no idea who this person is. And I'm correcting my drawing. You see that? From there to there. Maybe I overcorrected. Doesn't matter. You know, the one thing we can't say as painters when we make mistakes is we'll fix it in post. I've got to fix it right now. So I'm moving the ear here. See, I had the ear there. Here I had the cheekbone here. And I'm moving it because it's just paint and I can do what I want. And I'm not married to my mistakes. As long as I can catch them, I'm fine. You can see how easy it is to sort of correct. And this is what I do with my paintings. If you ever look at my paintings, you'll think that I don't make mistakes. But if you ever look at the real paintings, you're going to see, and you look closely, you'll see that arms and faces and eyes and clouds. I'll paint one series of clouds. I go, oh, that doesn't work. And then I'll just come right back and paint it at sunset. And I'm making changes all the time because it just, the only thing that matters in the end is that you like the work and knowing that you can. Here, I do mutton chops. He's no longer Raleigh, Mr. Raleigh. Now look how light the shadow looks now that I put that. So this again is relationship, so now I need to darken that. So now I'm going to mix some white into this green. And this is how it's too dark. And that's another thing. You see, I'll take a stroke and I'll put it down and I'll immediately evaluate that stroke. So one of the things I've noticed that some of my students will do is they'll do a stroke like this and they won't evaluate it. And so all of a sudden they'll say, the flesh is too blue, or it's too this, or it's too that. And I'll say, yeah, because didn't you notice when you put your first stroke down? And they went, no. And I was like, that's when you notice. You put it down and sort of you taste it. So that's a little too light, that's a little too dark. So let's find something in between. This is a Goldilocks moment. There we go. I do want to give him facial hair, but I'll get to it. I think this guy's scaring me. Get his eyes. I'm not looking at a reference for this, so I really don't know who I'm painting. For anybody who's seen my ball and cylinder demo, right here I'm doing a core shadow, which is the darkest area of the shadow right before the halftone, and the halftone being that blurred edge between the light and the dark. Do the same thing here on the nose. And now I'm going to give him some facial hair. And I'm just putting paint up, and as I'm working, something else you'll notice is in the beginning of the painting I was using a lot of medium, and right now I'm going and using less medium. And the reason for that is that as I become more comfortable with what I'm doing, I want to build up my paint more. So I start out thin, and then I build up my paint. And now I'm not using much medium at all, or I'm using just some of the medium that's already been on the palette. And bear with me. Talking and painting is a skill, and it's one that I'm still working on, and will always work on. I'm using a brush here. It's a beautiful brush. It's a Klinsky Sable, New York Central's, which is part of JerrysArtarama division. It's really when I feel like I can't find good brushes anymore, I can. This is a watercolor brush primarily, but I do paint. In my oils, I often use watercolor brushes and have for 40 years. And often because they're sometimes the best made brushes, but I also use oil brushes. So let's see. Here, I'm going to switch up my brush and get my lights. And now I'm going to build up my lights. And I mentioned in another video that often when I'm painting, I feel like I'm sculpting. And here's an example. I feel like as I'm building up my lights, it's almost as if I'm adding clay to a portrait. So if I wanted to build up a nose in clay, if I was working in clay, soft clay or plastiline, I would take clay and I keep adding it to build up the nose. But it's the same thing in oil paint. If I want to build up this nose, I'm going to add whites here. If I want to build up the forehead, I'll add white. If I want to build up things I want popping towards me, I'm going to build them up lighter. So let me quickly do this. And then after this one, I'm not going to paint a face for each color, but I'm going to quickly do a shape and just show you how it looks. But this is very much how I would build up a green grisaille. Otherwise, if you want to be fancy, call it, impress your friends, call it verdaccio. Italian word for a green grisaille. Grisaille being a French word, that means basically gray underpainting. And here you can just see I'm just moving my brush and bring up some more lights, keep building up my lights. Every time you blend, you kill the lights. So watch what happens to that light. See, it goes into nothing. So if every time you blend, you need to reestablish your lights. And that's one of the things that one of the biggest complaints I hear about people that are afraid to oil paint is that things get muddy. And one of the things is as they're trying to blend and soften, they forget that they're also knocking down their lights and they need to reestablish. So as long as you know that you need to always reestablish after you've blended, then it's not an issue. So I'm not sure how this is looking. I never know because I'm working so close, and in my own studio, I'm always stepping back, but I want to stay on camera for you guys. Also, I'm not using my glasses. So I'm painting this without reading glasses, out of it for vanity's sake only. Now, I'm going to use a brush with no paint. This is a Hamburg brush that mimics mongoose hairs. It's a synthetic, but it mimics mongoose hairs. And it's a gorgeous brush. And I'm going to do a technique that I talked about in another video called batteggiando. And batteggiando is a stippling effect. It's a dabbing effect like this. And what a batteggiando does is it does very smooth transitions. The brush has to be dry. That means no mineral spirits, no medium, and no paint on it. This is the blending of Giovanni Bellini, of Leonardo da Vinci. You can see it when you go up close to Leonardo's and to Bellini's. You can see in areas, sometimes you can still see the stipple effect. And you want a brush that's soft, but not too soft. Bristles way too hard. Klinsky sable too soft. This is the perfect brush for this. And this size is great. It's also a round. For this effect, you do not want to use a flat, you do not want to use a bright, and you do not want to use a filbert. If you're confused on those terms, on the Jerry's website, they show you examples of all the different types of shapes of brushes, and it's an education. So if you are confused, it's less confusing than you think, and it can be easily explained. So here I am. I'm going to use batteggiando. I'm going to use something called a maul stick, and I'm not going to really use this because it's going to block the painting for the camera. But if I wasn't being filmed, this is what I would use, which would rest my hand like this so that I'm not working like that. So what I'm going to do, just to keep the shot without having it blocked, is I'm just going to rest my hand on this other hand. And now I'm doing the battajando. I really have no idea who this man is. And I'm going to do something which I talked about in the ball and cylinder, which is fight for my halftone, to make things turn. So I'm cleaning my brush here. And this gets a very, if one wants this, right? If one wants this type of effect, it gets a very nice and sort of brushless transition. So this is the opposite of many painters, you know, like a late Rembrandt has brushwork all over the place. Frans Hals, Sargent, all these great. So this is the technique I'm doing here. Is it's just a different style. I personally like all different styles. I like all different ways. I paint using all different. So you can see in my paintings, you can see lots of brush strokes, lots of impasto, lots of areas that I don't like to be married to one way of handling anything. But the reason why I'm showing you this is because you're probably more familiar with a very brushy style. And maybe when you look at a Leonardo, maybe it's more mysterious to you and you don't know how it's done. So I'd rather spend my time teaching what you don't know than maybe what you might know. That's the ear. So you can see as I'm building this up, I could keep working on this for another hour, and I'm not going to. I'm going to wrap this one up soon. But here I can build up my darks. Give them that mustache. Hair is soft. I know, what do I know about hair, right? As some people have mentioned, they've noticed that Jeff Bezos is actually doing these demos. And I have to say to the type of people that leave comments like that on YouTube, that this is actually Jeff Bezos, this is what I have to say. Listen carefully. Don't tell anybody. Shh. It's my hobby when I'm not on my yacht or on my plane or flying in spaceships. I don't want people to know I'm painting and teaching. Okay, so DL that one, all right? Thank you. So as I was saying, John Wellington, when he's painting, has no idea who these people are. Certainly wasn't my barista this morning. So right now I'm just kicking in some darks. One day maybe I'll do an eyeball demo, but until then, I'm going to give you a hint about eyeballs. And the hint is that they're balls. An eyeball is a ball that sits into the skull. So an eyeball is turning like a sphere, which will bring you back to another demo that I've done, which is the ball and sphere. Once you can render a sphere, you can render an eyeball. There we go. Let's get the ear. Darks against the lights, and lights against the darks. That's how you create depth. That's how you keep things from being muddy. So many of my paintings were done with greenish underpaintings, and what I've often loved to do is let the green show as I work in subsequent layers, so that the green is coming through, especially on lighter skinned people, because it reads as the veins, it reads as all of the things that you see underneath the layers of epidermis, the flesh. So here, I'll do one last thing. Take an even smaller brush. Another thing about the eye, one day they'll get into, is it's a membrane, it's not the flesh, so it takes light differently. It needs to be wet all the time, so it reflects in a way that the flesh reflects, and you can see their highlights, but the eye will often reflect light. Sometimes it'll reflect the room around it. Same thing with the lips, it's a membrane. So different parts of your face, different parts of your body, your nails, all refract and reflect light differently. And that sort of sometimes tells you what they're made of. Just like the fabric around you, the metal around you, everything takes light slightly differently. Again, I could keep working on this, and believe me, I want to. But for time's sake, I'm going to call this round one. Right here, I'm just making sure that my brush is dry. I'm going to call this round one of my Verdaccio underpainting. When this dries, that would be round two. And round two would then be not glazes, but semi-transparent and semi-opaque applications of the set, of my raw sienna, my raw sienna, my burnt sienna, and my ivory black, especially these two colors. I could do some glazing with this, but it's mixtures of this that will go on top of this that will really give this older feeling of old master painting. And it's really beautiful. And then after that, there are glazing colors, a glazing set that can be used then to get to that next level. And that's how paintings were built. And again, glazing uses less pigment, so the much more expensive pigments were used for glazing. So this is my man from another epoch. I do not know who he is, but I hope you enjoyed it. Today was a demo of my limited portrait and underpainting palette. You can hear when I talk, I really, and teach, I really am quite improvisational, and I do make references to other lessons that I love giving. So if you have any interest in seeing the eye demo, or seeing this gentleman painted in color on top of this, or a Van Gogh demo, which is a completely different technique. It's all impasto paint, and in fact it's a demo that shows how color is wonderful, but value is more important. And once you understand value, you can use any color. And this demo is great for Tuscan pine because they have a range, I think, of 96 colors, if I have that right. And many of them you might not ever think of using. And this is a demo that really shows all those colors that you have that I don't know when to use this. The Van Gogh demo is the time to really play. And that's why I love it. You play with so many colors. In fact, it's the yin to the yang of this demo. There's demo just on glazing. So please put down in the comments section things that helped you, things that you want to know more that I can offer. If it's in with no cooking tips, just painting. But anything that you would like to see, just let me know, let JerrysArtarama know, and we'll see if we can make it happen. And guys, thanks again for watching and seeing what comes out of brushes when you don't know what you're doing. Okay, bye-bye. Remember, it's just paint.